Judas betrayed Jesus. We don't know if it was for the money or if Jesus was a disappointment to him, not the Messiah that he was looking for. Maybe he just was dealing with some things. But he knew where Jesus would be. They'd been there before. He knew that Jesus would be praying in that garden, and so he led them straight to him. A bunch of people, some soldiers as well, came with clubs and swords. And it was a surprise to the disciples who were there. Peter pulled out a sword and struck the ear of one of the servants who was there. Now Jesus, he put an end to the violence. He gave himself to them, said, "Take me." I mean, God didn't come to be human, to fight, to hurt people and kill people, but to love them and to give them life. And so Jesus actually reached out and healed the ear of the man named Malchus that Peter had wounded. They arrested Jesus and they took him to the high priest. And there, all kinds of people hurled false accusations against him. They said all kinds of horrible things that Jesus done, and Jesus said, "Everything that I have done is out in the open." He didn't deny any of it. In his mind, in God's mind, it was good. It was loving. But the thing is that the religious authorities, they didn't want to be the bad guys. They knew that Jesus was popular, and just in reality, they wanted to stay away from those kinds of things, but they wanted to still get rid of Jesus. And so they took him to Pilate, who was the Roman overseer in Jerusalem. Yeah, let's make the Romans the bad guys. But when they got there, Pilate didn't want to have anything to do with it. I mean, yes, he did, what was expected. I mean, he interrogated Jesus. He, tried to engage with Jesus. And then he took it back out to the people who had brought him and said, I can release a prisoner for you. How about I just release Jesus? This is a little Passover tradition we've got. And they said, "No, we don't want Jesus. Why don't release Barabbas for us?" Now, Barabbas was a murderer. I mean, multiple times over. He was a bad guy. And so they got Pilate to release Barabbas. I mean, clearly they weren't in their right minds. During this time, the disciples were waiting and watching. Some of the women with them, Mary and Salome and Martha. Peter was out in the courtyard, and someone recognized him and said, weren't you a follower of Jesus? And Peter said, "No." In fact, Peter denied it 3 times. I mean, you have to give the guy a break. He was scared. He was frightened. I'm sure he hated himself for saying it, but he denied being a follower of Jesus. Meanwhile, Pilate had to do something, so he had Jesus stripped down bare. They beat him. I mean, hard. They hurt Jesus, and they placed a crown of thorns on him. "Hail, King of the Jews!" They were mocking him, even as they spoke truth, even though Jesus was a king, even though Jesus was royalty and worth so much. But that wasn't the kind of power that Jesus was seeking. He wasn't seeking people to fawn over him. He didn't care if people mocked him. Pilate interrogated Jesus some more, trying to really get at what is going on. I mean, Pilate really didn't know what was happening. He wanted to know why Jesus wasn't fighting, why he wasn't fighting for his life and arguing. He just didn't get Jesus. He didn't understand a person who was not in it for themselves. That Jesus was not in this for power for himself. He was trying to give power to others. And so to Pilate, Jesus wasn't any kind of threat. He didn't want to set himself up in Pilate's place. And so he tried to release Jesus again. He went out to the crowds this time and he said, "Let me release him. I've taken care of things. And I think he'll be good now." And the people shouted back, "Everyone who claims that they are king is against the emperor." Well, that made Pilate think twice because his position was precarious. Religious leaders, those who were threatened by Jesus, they stirred up the crowds. And I don't know what kind of people were there, but would you believe they started to shout, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" And pretty soon, a chant came, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" How quickly people turn. How fickle we can be, our hearts. This frightened Pilate. And the people who were threatened by Jesus, they forced his hand. And so Pilate sentenced Jesus to death. Not just any kind of death, but the most brutal kind, the kind that was reserved for the worst kind of criminal ever. This was a dark day. Not just for Jesus, but not just for the people of Israel, not just for the Roman Empire. It was a dark day for all of humanity. And the worst was yet to come.